Hey. So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about the documents that every startup needs to have. So, stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Tammy Shambade, host of Ask Tammy Live, where we discuss the best ways to establish your business, protect your name, and keep your profits, right? You are serious about building your business and brand, and I am here to help you protect it. So, today's question of the day, let's just jump in, is what legal documents do you need for a startup? Right? So this is a really interesting question. And I'm going to say this as we jump in, as we begin. When we're talking about the documents you need for a startup, the first thing that you need to establish is that you truly have a startup. Now, sometimes we kind of use terms interchangeably, but a startup is very distinct from a small business. A startup is a business that has been created for the purposes of very quick growth, right? So its purpose is to scale, to solve a problem, and to scale quickly within its industry. Whereas a small business might stay it wants to grow, obviously. Scaling and growing is important, but it might not be doing it within the same means. So most of the time when we're talking about startups, they've usually been formed or should be formed as a corporation, because in order to achieve the growth that the startup desires, right, they are often looking for external funding sources. That's when you'll hear things about venture capital. That's where you'll hear things about various stages of funding. That's where people get their pitch decks ready, right? Because they're going to tell people about this startup and they know they need capital to drive the growth forward. So all of that being said, as a foundational base, let's get into the documents you need for a startup specifically. The first document that I want you to be aware of is your certificate of formations or your articles of incorporation, depending on the state where you get formed. This is the legal documentation that registers your business in that state, right? And again, for the most part, if you are starting a startup and you expect to get external funding through venture sources, you want to do rounds of raising funds, you're going to be wanting to be formed as a corporation. So you'll probably have articles of incorporations. In the state of Texas, we have different names for it, again, certificate of formation, but essentially it's the legal document that establishes the existence of your business, of your corporation. And this document is very important. There are some critical things that you'll do at this stage that have implications for the way that you grow, for the way you get investments into your business, right, into your corporation. So you'll come up with things with regards to kind of initial folks who are helping with governance. You'll also talk about shares that are going to be authorized. And that's a whole nother topic for another day in terms of what some of that terminology looks like. But all of this is established at the very beginning. And I guess let me spend a few moments to talk about authorized shares. At the beginning of forming your corporation, there is a time where you have to decide how you're going to break up ownership into various pieces. Most of the time when people are seeking external funding, there's an exchange. You get partial ownership, right, for your contribution. And your ownership comes with certain rights. Doesn't mean that you're doing the day-to-day management. It means that you're a shareholder, right? That means you have shares. But at the beginning of a corporation, you have to determine how many shares are going to be available to distribute, right? And so this is what we're talking about with actual authorized shares and things like that. So that's the first document that's really important when we're talking about a startup specifically. Another document that is important is called the action of the incorporator. So one of the things that usually happens is when you're forming a business, this applies to LLCs or corporations, there is the person who actually goes and does the filing, and that person is known as the incorporator. Sometimes when you're starting a startup, you have, your legal counsel, for example, serving as that. It might be one of the primary shareholders, but oftentimes the way your business is going to be structured is not necessarily directly correlated with who the incorporator is. But the incorporator is doing all the things that kind of lay the foundation for the business. So you're going to want some documentation that authorizes and says that this incorporator is taking these actions. And that's the action of the incorporator document. The next document that I want you to be aware of are your bylaws. So your bylaws to me are, and again, we're speaking it from a corporation world. All right. Your bylaws are the documents that stay how your corporation is going to run. Your bylaws are going to tell you about how many officers you have. Your bylaws are going to tell you about, they might have restrictions as to how people can buy and sell shares. Your bylaws are going to give some of the governing fundamentals of your business. They might have some restrictions regarding actions that people take. They'll talk about how people vote. They'll talk about if there are special classes of ownership that kind of determine the rights that people have. All of this is in your bylaws. And if you are truly a startup and you're seeking out capital, or you're seeking out funding, you're seeking out investors, they are going to be paying attention to the language in your bylaws to make sure that it complies with what they're trying to do. Poorly drafted bylaws are going to impact whether or not people are going to take you seriously as you're seeking out investors. Before they'll enter into certain arrangements with you, they're going to make sure that your bylaws are in order. If they're not, if they like you enough, they'll encourage you to get them fixed. If they don't like you enough, then you're going to be left out on your own. So bylaws are the next document. The next document that's important for our startups is your stock purchase agreement. Now, again, remember, we're in the corporation world, and we usually spend more time talking about LLCs, but this is corporate world. So when you have a corporation, right, one of the things that you have is, again, your shares, your stocks. These are things that that people buy, right, in order to say, I have a piece of this puzzle, a piece of this pie. Now, when you are distributing that amongst the founders, the initial owners, the people who have founded the business, you want to distribute that using your stock purchase agreement. Your stock purchase agreement is going to basically provide a level of protection in terms of the investment that has been made. It's going to determine certain things with regards to price points. It's going to talk about how these things can be transferred between the business and the founders. So your stock purchase agreement, there's just so many things that it can do, but a stock purchase agreement is critical when you are building or starting your startup. Okay, we really want you to make sure that you're paying attention to that, because it's going to have implications for future fundraising attempts as well. The next document that I want you to keep in mind is if you have a startup that has certain pieces of technology and your founders are bringing those to the plate, you want to have some type of technology assignment agreement. And what does this mean? This means that you are taking the ownership of the technology and you're giving it to the corporation. Now, if that's not going to be the case, right? Let's say you don't want to do that, then there needs to be some type of agreement that talks about the licensing of the technology if it's important. But a technology assignment agreement is really built to help you assign technology to the corporation so that it owns that and can be freely able to kind of move. If there are some questions about who owns the technology, again, if you're seeking funding and you're looking to investors, they're going to come back and say, because they're going to go through something called due diligence, where they look at all your contracts, they look at all your documentation, and they're going to say, you have this technology, but when we do our investigation, the ownership is open-ended. Anybody can claim ownership to this. Do you have actual rights to this technology to say your business owns it? If not, you're going to run into issues. So a technology assignment agreement is critical. Along the same lines, you may also find a confidential information and invention assignment agreement. And it's basically the same thing. We're talking about assigning inventions to the company as well. The confidential portion of this document is also saying that there are certain things that has a founder, has an initial contributor to this, that you're going to get insight into confidential information. And you want some type of contractual document limiting someone's ability to go out there with the confidential information and kind of say, okay, I'm going to go left or I'm going to go right. Okay. So we want to make sure that we are keeping our confidential information and invention assignment agreements in place for your startups. All right. Very, very, very critical. You have a few more documents. You're like, oh my goodness, Sammy, you've never spoken to us about this many documents before. Yeah, we weren't talking about startups. Today, we're talking about startups, and there's a lot more. There are a lot more documents required in order to facilitate the type of things that startups need. So that's why we're going into this. The next thing is board consent. And so when we're talking about the structure of a corporation has a shareholder, and then under the shareholders, there's usually there's board of directors. The directors help kind of execute the vision from the owners, and then the officers do the day-to-day. So I always think of it as a pyramid. I usually think of it shareholders at the top, then directors underneath, underneath that, and then your officers. Now, here's the thing. When you are taking out action, you're deciding, okay, we're going to open a bank account, or we're going to buy this, or we're going to get a loan, or we're going to do that. There needs to be a proper paper trail. And part of this paper trail is your board consent documents. These are the documents that are saying the corporation is consenting to so-and-so carrying out this action. Usually it assigns power, right, and authority to certain people to carry out functions for the corporation. If it does not exist and you have somebody who is signing on bank accounts and things like that, the question is, do they have valid consent to be able to transact on behalf of the corporation? Okay? So you want board consent documentations. Again, you want documents that are saying the board of directors consent to these actions being taken. 2 more documents. We're almost there. The next thing that you want to make sure you have is your tax ID number. And you get that in part by completing a form called the SS4. You'll also hear, instead of tax ID number, you'll hear employment identification number. But you're going to want to have that form filled out properly. That form is going to request somebody to be a point of contact. And that person, when they're asking for the point of contact for your EIN, for the main person that they're utilizing, that should be somebody who is in a position of leadership for the business in terms of completing the EIN, right? Or your tax ID number application. So you want to make sure all of that is usually explained on your SS4 document. All right. And finally, just something, and there's always going to be different ones, I should say. So this isn't quite finally, but in terms of like the initial starting off, the final thing I want to talk about are your employment agreements. You may find it necessary to have employment agreements if you're bringing in employees, or if you all as the founders are also wanting to work for the business, right? If you are going to be functioning in an employment capacity, you want an employment agreement to clearly state that and to define that. The problem is, if you don't clearly define that, the rights and the decisions that you make can become blurred between the lines of, is this action that's being taken as a shareholder, or is this action being taken as a board of director, or is this action being taken as an employee? And if as an employee, are you creating things? Do you have rights? All of that becomes really messy, and they all come into play when people are looking at at startups, when they're looking for funding, or when they're looking for other opportunities like mergers and acquisitions as well. So all of those documents are documents that are important for you to keep in mind in your business if you are starting a startup business. All right. So that's all for today. Let's see. We went into a little bit more detail than usual, but I think that this was important for the folks who are looking for information in that. What I found is sometimes my business clients, they have started off pretty simply, but then they start to get to the place where they want to scale. And it's almost like their needs start transitioning and merging into the needs of a true startup. And so I want you, in case you are in that position, you've been building your business, but you recognize that there are opportunities for expansion that are available to you by way of funding. These are some of the documents that you want to invest in and you want to prioritize, so that you can become more appealing to potential investors. Okay. All right. Well, that's it for today. Now you might be going through all this and saying, hey, I want to know what my next steps can be. Well, we have a couple of different resources that are available to you. But what I think would be most beneficial to you at this point, if these are the questions that you're asking, you want to get with trusted counsel, right? You want to sit down with an attorney who understands these areas and get some assistance in terms of clearly defining and crafting each of these documents for your startup's unique needs. If you are, however, you've listened to this and you say, I'm not quite a startup, I'm more of a small business, like where can I get help? I want you to know that we have a checklist that is really available to you to really help you identify what steps you should take next. We also have a couple of free courses. I'll put the link to that below. But most important, if you want to find out what we're doing, if you want to keep up with us and find out more information about new courses, new opportunities that are available to you, please feel free to download the checklist and join our email list. When you join our email list, you'll be the first to know about cool things that are happening with the law office of Tammy Shiambade. All right. So all of that being said, the other thing is, hey, we love to hear from you. So feel free to follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and subscribe to this channel here on YouTube. Don't follow us in real life, just follow us online. And then finally, in the chat box, let us know if you're starting a startup and what your biggest challenges have been in terms of navigating the legal side or even the funding and growth stages of your startup. All right, that's all I have for you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.